On to PPM number 13, originally written February the 25th, 2004, as I continue with the 10th anniversary of revisiting an experiment that I undertook originally beginning in February of 2004 and then all the way to February of 2005. The experiment entailed writing for at least 1 hour every day for a full calendar year, picking up where I left off the day before, philosophical or phenomenological, to be specific, meditation, which is to say a writing that entailed focusing on a particular question that I had been pursuing, that is to say the fundamental question of being, capital B, and presuming that capital B, being, offers us up something to think about, which is to say that the meaning we make in our life is offered up in the extra or the excess that being offers us. And so there's something to be done. There's a work that can be done that's called philosophy that brings with it some significance, meaning making, I suppose. And there's a tradition. There's a tradition of undertaking meditations. And so in that tradition, probably most famously articulated or offered to us by Roman philosophy, that is to say Epictetus and then Marcus Aurelius, you have these sort of daily musings on the question of being. Now, as I've mentioned previously, what's different about these meditations that I'm undertaking is that, unlike the meditations that Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus undertook, mine aren't really focusing on and the ethical implications or trying to work out an ethics. What I'm trying to do in these meditations is to describe, through a kind of poetic, philosophical language, my understanding of how certain fundamental terms or words express the question of being. I was about to stop the recording, which would have been a way of starting over, because I found myself, as I was trying to give a sort of summary or reboot of what I'm doing, I found myself in this moment where there was language was escaping me. I confronted the very phenomena of ineffability that I do end up writing about in this experiment, because it's not easy to describe what I'm up to, and one would possibly think, well, okay, shut down the video, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But not knowing what you're talking about and not being able to find the language to express what it is that you're doing or feeling are two totally different things. And in this case, I was confronted with the limits of language as I was trying to offer some kind of very fundamental or basic summary of the project and what I'm up to, for anyone who might just be popping on and hasn't checked out any of the other meditations. So I came up against this phenomena that I've already written about, which is the silence. Now, I suppose what I wanted to say, or what I was trying to say, and it just wasn't, I had the thought and it wasn't coming out, was that, and this, I talked about this in yesterday's meditation, is that the methodology that I'm following, there is a methodology to this experiment, although I don't quite articulate it as such anywhere. But it's becoming clear to me now, 10 years later, that I have been operating with at least a methodology that is sort of I inherited, I suppose, as part of the training I received, first at Fordham and then the New School. And essentially it is that philosophy operates through language, and what we have inherited are these texts, these important texts of philosophy. And what's crucially important in those texts isn't so much the arguments that we find there, although those are important as well, but even more fundamentally, for me anyway, are these concepts or fundamental terms that are describing or expressing a certain fundamental experience. So there are terms such as being or nothing that represent the phenomena under investigation, if you will. So to think in terms of science, you know, a field of inquiry, a field of scientific research is defined by the phenomena that it studies, right? So biology, physics, chemistry, all of those fields are organized by the phenomena that's undertaken and what's being examined. So the phenomena that's under examination in this field of study that I'm undertaking are these sort of fundamental words. You know, it's a study of inherited philosophical words, and it's not enough to call them concepts because they have a certain material quality to them. And perhaps if you have studied some Hegel, then of course the concept does carry that sort of material or phenomenal quality, and that's what the phenomenology of spirit is all about for Hegel. But it's, in an everyday usage, if you say concept, the next word out of your mouth may be abstract, and which then you might follow with empty, right? So abstract concept, or concepts are abstract. They're speculative, and so they're sort of not concrete in the sense that they are just quote-unquote simply ideas, right? So last night in a graduate online seminar we had, we were talking about what's entailed in abstract thinking, and at what point are you capable of doing abstract thinking. And so the abstract thinking seems to carry with it something that it requires some kind of theoretical possibility of doing theory, speculation, etc. The words as concepts that I'm studying and that are under examination and that I am working with have more of a phenomenal quality or even a material quality to them. That is to say, they appear as something, and that's why I describe the work as poetic phenomenology, because it's a phenomenological experience. These are phenomena that are appearing to me and that I'm describing them, but that the description that I'm offering is poetic. So, okay, that's what's up with this project. And so just to bring up to speed where I am, I'm up to now the 13th meditation, and so just getting underway really in the year-long project. And yesterday, the word that appeared and that was described in the conversation or in the presentation that I've been making thus far, which has been focused on the question, how is it with the nothing? The word that appeared was a word from Zen, Buddhist philosophy, and that is the word wu-i-wi, W-U-I-W-U. That's how it's transliterated from the symbols that it was originally written in. So wu-i-wi. And wu-i-wi, I said, is akin to the question, how is it with the nothing? Because it releases us into an experience with the nothing. And in the description summary I made of yesterday's meditation, I noted that the nothing, and here the word wu is another instance of the expression of the nothing, stands for being's presencing. That is to say, what remains or what is in excess, and what gives us to think, right? So this whole project is an encounter with being's presencing, because being's presencing is the remain or the excess that allows us to think and then to write, and to write poetically and philosophically. All right, so onward to today's meditation. There's no question that the hearing that we are attempting to describe is more than a response to sound waves, although the sound waves generated by musical instruments, bells, drums, etc., can certainly be called evocative in the way we are using this term. So too can singing and chanting be understood as examples of evocative speech. After all, when we describe learning as a dialogic event, we are calling attention to a particular kind of communicative action where people are engaged in what we might call, following Arendt, the art of freedom, where the dramatic performance of speaking and listening creates the condition of plurality where all can see and be seen, heard and hear and be heard. This kind of performance is the essence of action as freedom. Drama, action, describes an event which is vivid and emotional, stirring and moving. When we stress the physicality of evocative speech and poetic dialogue, we recover the earliest denotation of the term phusis as the horizon of appearance, that through which being emerges and shines forth. With this emphasis, then, we are suggesting that the tidings of being are delivered through the dramatic performance of evocative speech, which can be identified within the wide range of communicative action. In other words, we should not reduce the discursive event of learning to something like deliberation or even dialectic, if by these terms we mean a rule-governed interaction that is formalized in a set of procedures that in effect limit the range of possibility and thereby undercut the entire thrust of learning as inquiry, seeking, and search. In saying this, however, we are reminded that our exemplar, Socrates, himself appears to have often proceeded dialectically, by short question and answer, so that we can see precisely on what assumptions and inferential steps a given conclusion rests, instead of being carried away by the magic of speech. There's no denying the existence of this Socrates, who appeared to be impatient with unthoughtful performances of poets like Ion, and downright hostile to the oration of sophists like Protagoras. Forgot to unplug the phone. There's no denying the existence of this Socrates who appeared to be impatient with the unthoughtful performance of poets like Ion and downright hostile to the oration of sophists like Protagoras. But what does it mean to contrast rule-governed discourse with magical speech? For Plato, the tradition of philosophy that evolved in his powerful wake, the contrast does not serve to simply make a distinction and thereby fix the parameters of what will be deemed legitimate and illegitimate forms of philosophical practice, and it certainly does this. It further serves to privilege a kind of communication that is rule-bound or archic, principle speech. Plato's hostility and impatience with the poets, which I will take up in more detail, is in fact the basis of the blueprint he offers for formal education, specifically the early childhood schooling. For Plato, poets and sophists are said to be reckless and denigrating of the great things, the gods, the divine ideas, and have taught people to know not the truth of these things. What is necessary for Plato is then a dialectical poetry that provides an antidote to the spreading virus of opinion, doxa. Because opinion is merely an expression of the way things appear, as opposed to how they actually are, Plato believed it was necessary to develop and formalize a manner of discursive engagement that enabled us to feel that we were on the right path to truth. Because, as discussed above, Plato believed that we as humans are incapable of adequately expressing the truth of the great things, his main concern was to ensure that we develop to the fullest extent this faculty reasoning that appeared most capable of discerning the difference between organized and structured assertions, the kind like a well-built temple that could withstand and endure the test wrought by the storms of time, and passionate speech, the kind like Ion's rhapsodies that were moving, stirring, but appeared as if transmitted from an unknowable beyond. Ironically, the frustration with magical speech, or the magic of speech, seems born from the same frustration with the limits of humanity. If only Ion could know why it is that he does what he does, perform the most stirring rhapsodies, then he would show his art of poetry to be worthy of the title art, because then it would be something he could instruct others in. Alas, he is but an interpreter of interpretation, a conduit of the message from the gods. But was not Socrates too a messenger of the gods? And could it be that Plato's depiction of him, especially in his middle and later dialogues, is simply a distortion of Socrates' stirring performances when he drew his interlocutors, like Menon, and those who heard him into a state of perplexity where he himself claimed to dwell? When Socrates doubted the message from the gods, the tidings, "You are wisest, Socrates," was not the effect of his response a delivering of the message that wisdom is the very recognition of our limits as humans? Perhaps it is then that Platonic privileging of dialectics, or rule-bound deliberation, that must be questioned insofar as it seeks to limit our limitations, rather than celebrate them as the opening of possibility, the freedom of plain discovery, which he correctly identifies as being at the core of education. The Platonic path to judgment appears then as a kind of highway of despair that, unlike Hegel's, which is despair brought upon us by the apparent existence of an invisible hand of reason, absolute spirit, moving behind the backs of humans to achieve its own ends, Plato's despair is born from the recognition and rejection of the primordial relation to being. It is a despair with hearing of woo-e-woo, perhaps uttered in the words of Heraclitus, which opened up for him not as a horizon of possibility, but as a chaotic abyss, which seems to follow from open-ended, aporetic, and seemingly anarchic communicative action. When human communication is moved by ongoing reinterpretation, then it suggests the temples of certainty that we have erected are indeed deconstructible and not fixed and eternal, as we suppose the realm of the gods to be. Wow. There was a lot there. So I seem to have definitely been on a roll that day. It's one of the longer meditations, and started off with this idea of hearing, and to bring back the idea of evocative speech. And here I remember something that I enjoyed writing, which was to talk about the dramatic performance. Evocative speech is a kind of drama that is vivid and stirring and moving. And in order to stress the physicality, the sense of it being embodied and felt, it's very important. And here I was trying to set up this contrast, I suppose, or I went towards a contrast with Plato. And I know that the short dialogue by Plato called the Ion, where Ion, a rhapsode, a singer of Homeric songs, is encountered by Socrates, or Socrates encounters him. They're on their way, moving in sort of different directions, and they come across each other. And Socrates hails him, "Hey, Ion, how are you? How's it going? And I see that you've won another competition." And, he says, "Ion, how is it that you do what you do? I mean, you're so good at what you do. You're the best at what you do." And then the whole dialogue unfolds with, Ion not being able to tell Socrates what it is, how it is that he does what he does. He just doesn't know. He just says, "It just comes over me. I'm infected." And it seems as if the gods, through Homer, sort of infect me and take over my soul, and I get carried away and I sing these songs. Sounds like a performance artist to me, or a musician of any example we want to give, right? Someone who's fully into the performance of the music that they are making. The problem here for Plato, and he uses Socrates as his main character, or the voice of this position, for Plato is that Ion isn't able to give an explanation. He isn't able to step back and reason, offer a sort of argument or an explanation for why it is that he does what he does. And because he can't do that, well, he can't teach the art that he's involved in, and it really questions for Plato the value of what he's doing. It's not to say it devalues it. I don't think Plato would say that. He's just saying that it doesn't go reach the level of philosophy, which is that practice that is capable of giving reasons. So Ion could be a philosopher in addition to being a rhapsode and a poet, but he's not. And in fact, that's something that Plato doesn't seem to really fully take up anywhere, which is to say the multimodality, right? It could be that one is both a poet and can also be a philosopher. Plato's point is that you can't do both at the same time, right? You're either in the throes of a rhapsody, of a singing poetic performance, or you're doing philosophy. And then he just sort of raises philosophy to the highest level possible. I think that the reason that I went here in this particular meditation was to sort of say that this work that I'm doing is something like the poetic rhapsody, if you will, or that modality that Ion finds himself in. And then further, I want to suggest that I believe that Socrates himself, in some of the accounts that we get from Plato, and perhaps others, there aren't a lot of accounts of Socrates, but there are some others, that Socrates himself was taken into this place where he was outside of himself, so to speak, right? And in so many of, in the famous discussion in the symposium where Socrates is talking about the teaching, and as far as I could tell, it's one and only teaching he ever received from Diotima, or Diotima. In that teaching he received, she talks about the translation would be something like the soul being lifted beyond itself into a vision of love. And so it seems to me that actually for Socrates to find oneself in the most profound state of philosophical thinking, one needs to be quite taken away into another state, or taken away. And so my presumption here in writing this is that one needs to allow oneself to be taken away, and then the attempt, actually the experiment, is to try to place oneself into that a location where one can be taken away. And just looking at these meditations and comparing what I did yesterday and looking at what I wrote today, what I wrote on the 23rd of February, which was yesterday, 10 years ago, and which I read yesterday, I don't think I was in the zone, but yet I sat down and I did my meditation. So that regardless of whether or not I went into the zone, I sat down to do the meditation. That was part of the experiment. The experiment today, reading this meditation, I can feel that I was very much in the zone, and that the words just were flowing, and that so many things I wanted to talk about just came flooding out. We're talking about Arendt, talking about Plato, talking about drama, etc., etc. So that it's interesting to look back at this experiment and just to see like what I was attempting to do and where I was hoping to go and where I often went. And it was this place that now I've been focusing a lot on that in my recent work. We'll call it. Sometimes I call it the threshold, sometimes I call it the open region, sometimes I call it the place of free-thinking. However we name this place, it's the place of the chirological, and it's the place where thinking happens. And for me, it's the place where learning happens. And last week in my undergraduate class, actually 2 weeks ago, I talked about the moment of learning being, using Foucault's citation of Baudelaire, the moment of learning being the moment of the heroic present. So how can we find ourselves in this heroic present? That was the experiment, that is the experiment that I undertook 10 years ago, and that's what these meditations are all about, which I will continue with tomorrow.